sí? Doncs som-hi.
Good morning, everybody. Is everybody sitting down? Well, Carl is coming from London. He was born in Scotland. He lives in Canada, so he doesn't understand Catalan. Therefore, we shall speak in Spanish. Please switch off your phones or put them on plane mode so that we do not have any surprises during the session. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for starting the week with this debate on time use at the Barcelona Time Use Initiative for a Healthy Society. And, well, things need to be brought up to date, so that's the name we're using at the moment. Time Use Week, to see what it is we're doing well, what it is we need to change. I'd like to start by telling you about a friend from school. In February 2012, he was diagnosed with lateral sclerosis, and he unfortunately died about 5 years ago. I do not want to be tragic about it or tell you about any unfortunate events, but he managed to turn his illness into something beneficial for other people. He wanted to be remembered by the way in which he lived. We perhaps shouldn't get to that sort of situation before we find out of what really matters, but he managed to keep time under control, to keep his phone under control. He was the master of his own life because he wanted to live extraordinarily. So that's why we have brought these two people here. We have about half an hour to chat to them, and we're going to ask them to give us a few tips on what it is that we're not doing quite so well so that we can have extraordinary lives like my friends. So this is Carla Estivill from the Estivill Sueño Foundation, and Carl Honore, author, well, he's a promoter and spokesperson for the slow movement, and the author of In Praise of Slow. Good morning to you both, and as we were discussing, let's speak in very practical terms, in very simple terms. Before we start, I should also express my gratitude to the organizers for inviting me to chair this session. So let's start with you, Carla. Could you tell us about the differences between the watch we carry on our waist or in our pocket, in our phone? All the information, the requirements, the needs, the hurries linked to that watch, to those devices, and our biological clock. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here and listening to us. I think these are some rather general thoughts that concern us all. I'd like to start by sharing that we all have our internal timekeeper that controls our circadian rhythm. Things such as sleep, the time we are asleep, the time we're awake. This is due to an internal clock managed mainly by the brain, the hypothalamus. This clock is genetically determined, but it is going to work properly if it is synchronized and works in harmony with our environment. This internal timekeeper would not work at all if we lived inside a cave, because light is the main synchronizer of our internal clock. Light, which is basically light during the day, darkness during the night. But what happens nowadays in comparison with how our ancestors lived? This takes us back quite a few years, right? But we need to remember how life was simpler back then. Naturally, light and darkness are being in a second term. What matters now is our social timekeeping, which is conditioned by our working hours, first of all, but also increasingly by the effect of artificial light, such as that in digital devices and advances and progress in the type of electrical lights we are using nowadays. The fact that we don't get home until late in the evening, Children are also arriving later, increasingly later, back home, and we are sleep deprived because we go to bed late, we get up early. In this country, it is confirmed that we are all generally sleep deprived, and this has consequences on our health. Carl, your book, In Praise of Slow, has not aged at all, or maybe it has, but it has aged really well. It is still very timely, and I'd like you to summarize the main ideas in your book, if you wouldn't mind. Well, we have to admit that the slow revolution has been a slow one. Indeed, this is a long-term change. It won't happen overnight. But in my view, this movement is even more important today than ever it has been ever before. I will go back to that topic in a second, but just to get started, I'd like to explain what the slow movement is. Many people use that word, slow. In our culture, there's a certain taboo linked against the slowness, right? There are many negative things like boredom, lack of intelligence, lack of productivity. When we talk about the slow movement with a capital S, it means something much closer to what Carla was explaining. Working and living at the right speed for what we are doing, for the tasks we have at hand. We all have a more artistic side. I think each and every one of us has a metronome, an internal metronome. And the idea of the slow movement is to find the right rhythm that is in harmony with our internal metronome. I love speed, in fact. Very often, faster is better, not always, right? But you have to find what musicians refer to as the tempo giusto, the right time. This idea is simple in essence, but is capable of changing absolutely everything. Since 2004, when my book came out, which became like the handbook for the slow movement, society has experienced the boom of social media, smartphones. All of this has sped us up. But the slow movement and movement in favor of slowness has also grown. There are many movements in favor of slowness, such as slow in education, slow sex, slow fashion, slow leadership, slow travel. So the tectonic plates are moving beneath the surface. There are just a few cracks coming up. We're in the right direction. We're moving in the right direction. I'd like to now speak about the pandemic. Do you think it has been an opportunity for us to see what really matters? We had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with our families, to think a lot about our families. Has that helped us adjust our biological rhythms? Indeed, I do think it has been a time to stop and think of our priorities. And this brings me closer to Carl's position and his explanations. It has been a time to realize the need we have to look after ourselves. And we have noticed how during the pandemic we have been able to sleep some more. The hours of sleep have increased. As I said, we are generally sleep deprived as a society, so we've been able to rest a little bit more. But we have also seen how our schedules have been pushed back slightly. We have realized that we need to rest more than we normally do. The expectations of the type of work we need to do, the possibility of teleworking, is probably going to give us increased autonomy regarding our time. And it is going to help us understand that the number of hours we spend in the office is not directly linked to an increase in productivity. So this pandemic has got us all thinking about these issues. I fully agree with Carla. In fact, at the start of the pandemic, many people got in touch with me to tell me how happy they were, because that's exactly what they had been looking for a long time. The pandemic forced us to carry out a sort of workshop on slowness. And I'd like to highlight that I'm not by any means a fan of the pandemic. It's been horrible for so many people, generally speaking, but I think we always need to find the silver lining. As Carla was saying, many people, and I would say, generally speaking, it has been an opportunity to take stock and think about what is important rather than what is urgent. For example, in the business area, the idea of working remotely was already being discussed, but now it's at the center of all debates, which I think is extremely positive. People were either concerned that they were not managing to keep up to speed, whereas now even top executives are saying, I'm not having a good time, I'm not doing so well, my health is not so well. So mental health is also at the center of the debate. And I think having control over our own time, having autonomy to decide over our own time is also extremely important. For many people, we have all experienced the same pandemic, but it's the same storm, but on different boats. Many people have taken back that control over their time. They're deciding when they are working and when they are resting. And the pandemic has also removed the temptation to fill up our diaries with lots of activities. We are still an extremely active society, and very often when we spot a gap in our timetable, in our schedule, instead of celebrating it, we run to fill it with some other activity. The pandemic removed the possibility to do that quite so readily. We had to reconcile ourselves with the art of doing nothing, which is at the center, at the core of the slow revolution. We are still in a time of pandemic. I do not have a crystal ball, but I think many of us have learned so much during this past year and a half. You were talking about connection. I think the first iPhone was designed in 2007. I don't know whether technology is an ally or an enemy of time. What do you think? To me, it could be either. It depends on how you use it. Teleworking, for example, can be a wonderful tool. And why do I say this? Well, let's say we have a work meeting. Before the pandemic, you would have to go to the office. It may take you a couple of hours to get there, and then you went back home. Now we do it via Zoom. So if the meeting takes 2 hours, well, it is your decision. What are you going to do with those 2 hours? If you use those 2 hours to spend them on social media and look at everybody else with envy, that's a choice you make on how to use your time. That in that case, technology is going to be something damaging for you. If you use those 2 hours to have a nap, to make love to your partner, to play with your children, to draw, to take a walk in nature, well, I think that's a huge benefit, isn't it? So it depends on how you use technology. it is your own decision. I have the feeling that with the pandemic, people are making better decisions. As a result of the pandemic, people are making better decisions regarding their use of technology and their time. Indeed, technology has helped us get through this pandemic in a slightly more comfortable way. Technology is a wonderful opportunity to solve many problems, to be able to work from home, to consume in a different way. But you have to know how to use it. For us, in fact, it is still a disruptor to our internal rhythms, and therefore we need to draw the line somewhere very clearly. I've met people, particularly teenagers, who use technology in a way that takes up all of their time. And what does this mean? Well, they stop doing so many things that we all used to do in our teenage years. I think we can generalize. We can't generalize. I think not only teenagers, but also grown-ups stop doing many things when we have a device in our hands. And very often in the evening, these devices disrupt our ability to disconnect, switch off, and go to sleep. So we need to have a clear boundary, both for our health and for our mental health as well. Well, but we shouldn't be too hard on this new generation of digital natives. I think they are realizing themselves of the dangers. They will also in many cases realize, they often realize that it's enough using technology, enough is enough. They want to be present face to face with our friends. We have this term stacking, when kids go out to have a coffee together, they put their mobile phones on a pile, on a stack in the center of the table, and the first one who reaches for the phone is going to pay the bill for everybody else. So there's this agreement that they are all putting their phones aside so they can be together properly, face to face. And that is a decision that people in this new generation are making. They are making this conscious decision. They are human beings. They have the same basic needs, the same desires, and the same wishes and the same aspirations as the rest of us. So I am optimistic. I think we've gone through a transitional phase. At the beginning, when there's any form of new technology, particularly when it is so tempting as IT is, we always overdo it. And with time, we realize what the social rules around it should be, what the protocols should be around those devices so that we can make a better use of them. And I think that's the direction in which we're going right now. Indeed, whenever there is a new technology, they always cause a stir. I'm thinking specifically of the arrival of mobile phones to schools. Many schools collect all mobile phones at the beginning of the day, and the effect is unbelievable because during one class, one lesson and the other, kids are communicating, they're talking to each other. I work quite a lot in Silicon Valley. In fact, my last trip before the lockdown was there. And what's happening in Palo Alto? Well, those parents working in Google, Facebook, etc., are not giving their kids access to screens, quite the opposite. It is increasingly common to not let them use those devices until they're older, when there are perhaps very clear rules set as to when they can use them. They can perhaps not take their cell phone to bed, that sort of thing. And these are the most technology-obsessed people, gadget-obsessed people in the world, and they are coming to that conclusion too. You have to learn how to switch off those devices from time to time. How many kids do you have, Carl? I have 2. Okay, so between the three of us, we have 8 children. Do you think, are they, do you think, as influenced by our speed and how we rush from one thing to the next as much as we are, as adults are? What do you think? Yes, I think boredom is extremely important because during that time of boredom, unstructured time, when you don't know what's going to happen next, that is when, well, let's call it boredom. That's when kids learn to be creative, to experience, to. We must let them have times of boredom to stimulate their imagination. Boredom is the springboard to imagination, creativity, and you can see that both in children, amongst children, but also in the business world, in Silicon Valley, Wall Street, etc. The most successful companies in the world are creating spaces for their employees to be able to switch off, to daydream, and be able to switch their minds off slightly because they have read the reports and the studies that say that that is key, that that opens the door to creativity. It is a habit that we need to show our children, we need to teach our children. Maybe they're not familiar with it because they do not see us doing it, right? That's right, they see us carrying our devices on us the whole time. They're in our pockets the whole time and we look at them the whole time. So that is the case indeed, yes. I was recently at an event where 12 people, there were 12 of us, and everybody was looking at their phones the whole time. We were not letting our minds drift. We were not daydreaming. And I have an iPhone myself and I love it. And I love being connected the whole time, but you have to be able to switch it off. You have to be able to use that button. Carla, can you give us a few practical examples on what we can do at home, things that we're maybe not getting right without being aware of that? Well, as if we value our health and our rhythms, we're going to look after them over the whole day. Our social time needs to match our biological time. So there are many choices we can make in terms of what we choose to do and what we choose not to do. The key factor for health is exposure to natural light, which we seem to forget. But exposing ourselves to light does not mean being indoors near a big window. It means going out for up to 2 hours a day, doing activities in the outdoors. How do we do this on our day-to-day? For example, we need to be able to give our patients advice when there are problems with our sleep patterns, our circadian rhythms. We need to take more serious action, but it's just as important as nutrition. And what we recommend our patients to do in order to synchronize their biological rhythms is, for example, in the morning, it is very important to wake up at the same time every day, have breakfast and get up. And very often, because of teleworking, we have stopped doing that. But it is important. It gives information to our brain. It tells our brain that it is time to be alert. And that's when our hormones and neurotransmitters begin to get going. And then we can walk to work. It is extremely important for our synchronization. We are walking, so we are doing a little bit of physical activity. We are exposing ourselves to sunlight. When we are teleworking, we stop doing that. So teleworking has certain downsides in this sense, because all the information we used to give to our brain to help us synchronize our rhythms, we need a lot of information throughout the day: physical activity, light, social interaction. All of these things, we stop doing them during lockdown if we are teleworking, and this deprives our brain of information. The message our brain receives is that it's something similar to what happens at nighttime. So we tell our patients, for instance, well, If you have to drive to work, make sure you park a little bit further away from where you actually need to and walk the last stretch of the way. So walking or counting steps, it's not something I'm a fan of, but science has shown how the number of steps we take during the day is a good tool to measure how much exercise, how much activity we're doing. We should walk between 7,000 and 10,000 steps per day. That is what is advisable. Each one of us should adapt those recommendations to their daily lives. At the end of the day, there are different things we can change. For example, if you're walking to do the school run, well, you can do that walking instead of taking the car. You can do the shopping in local shops rather than taking the car or shopping online. Just a few small changes we can make during the day. And Carl, could you give us some tips from the perspective of the slow movement? Little changes we can do every day. Well, we have 5 minutes left, right? So I'll be quick. I think the key word is social. We have talked about social interaction, the social connection with other human beings is extremely important for me. When we talk about slowing down, reconnecting with our circadian rhythms, with our natural rhythms, I think we always run the risk of falling in a trap of thinking that this is an individual process, even a selfish process. Each one of us, from the privacy of our homes, we make a set of decisions. For me, that's only the first step. In the long run, the goal, the ultimate goal of stepping on the brakes and slowing down is to reconnect with people around us. So that's why the Time Use Week is such a wonderful initiative, because policies are being discussed, creating legislation is being discussed, creating basically a structure that will allow us all together to slow down as a society and benefit from doing so. There's an African proverb that says something like, if you want to be quick, if you want to move fast, go on your own. If you want to go far, go together. So I think that's what we need to remember. So going back to the tips you asked me, in your question, tip number 1 is to prioritize have a look at our diaries, at our schedules, and spot something this week that we can just not do. We can just remove it from our schedule and nothing will happen. That will give us a little bit more space for the other things we have in our schedule. So that's number 1. Tip number 2.
I'll reiterate again. To be a bit more specific, there are studies which show that when 2 people are talking joint in the same space together, it could be father, son, 2 partners, friends. If there is a cell phone which is visible, it doesn't have to sort of ring or vibrate, nothing. If it's just there, visible, these people maintain the conversation on a more superficial level. The next time they meet together for the conversation with someone else, please hide your phones, put them in your pocket, put them in your satchel. And with this very small attitude pro-slow life, you'll concentrate a lot more and your conversation will be far more enriching. Incorporate some kind of slow ritual. That will depend on each person. Do quick drawings or doodle away, so to attempt to vaccine yourself against the virus of haste. 1 minute more. We have politicians here, and in the first row, who have to implement your suggestion. What would you like? What would be your message to them? Well, there should be a certain awareness of the question of time. Not just make aware individuals, but companies, schools, old people's home, sports centres, sports facilities. That must be done together so that we can adapt and dedicate our time to bring forward meal time, especially in the evening, and be able to dedicate to these slower things, to disconnect from work, so that kids shouldn't go to their out of school activities too late, and we'll have time to disconnect, to wind down, which are part of the slow movement, right? And above all, to become aware. The awareness is essential. Not that we're not going to be more productive if we spend more hours warming our bums in the office, if you like, which at a European level we have seen. That after a given number of hours, our productivity is not going to increase. And we must be efficient at work. We must be masters of our efficient use of time at work. I tell politicians or decision makers, pay no notice to this taboo this taboo, because it is a myth. It's a lie. We slow down if we use these natural biological circadian rhythms, call them what you may. We're going to have, if we respect them, we're going to have a healthier, more sustainable, and more productive society with more solidarity. We don't have to sacrifice productivity to slowness. No. If we implement intelligent policies to this end, this slow credo will lead to a better society for all. Thanks. Before going into the opening speeches, as I'm a journalist, I've taken stock of where we come from. In 2014, the Advisory Council on the time zone reform attempted to set in train a series of ideas. These in Spain, these 2 hours more for lunch. In March 2017, the then regional minister, Moret, received the conclusions, and in July, the then regional prime minister, Carla, together with many other entities, agreed upon a pact for time reform, so that in January 2025 be the seminal moment where everything changes. I said the government allow itself 8 years to apply a time reform. That was June 2017. The clock has been ticking. There are 4 years left. We'll see whether there'll be a sprint in the next 2 years and hurrying up to ensure that the timetable which they made their own is respected in terms of making a better, more rational use of time. Now the coordinator, Marta of Barcelona Time Use Initiative, BTUI, she's going to present the act, and we can, so perhaps you can go down and we can all listen to her from down there.
Bon dia a tothom, bon dia autoritats.
Good morning everyone, authorities and regional minister, And thank you, Carla and Carlas, for this very interesting conversation on which small changes we can carry in our own lives to improve our organisation in terms of time. As a coordinator of the Barcelona Time Use Initiative, which picks up the legacy of the well-known initiative for a timetable reform or time reform, I am delighted to be able to open the Time Use Week in Barcelona and also welcome the 43rd World Congress for Researching the Use of Time. It is not a coincidence that Catalonia and that Barcelona be the host for this week and the Congress of the IATUR. 3 years ago, we kicked off a if you like, a reflection on how we could contribute with the Catalan experience and the local agreements to put policies concerning time at the centre of the global agenda. Because the challenge of time is not just an individual issue, it is also, it affects us all, the global challenges there. We have attempted to make this a possible dream, and in only 2 years, the Time Use Week has become a key week at an international level to bring together all those people who are working hard for a better use of our time and a better organisation of our timetables. Barcelona is now a territorial benchmark for time use of time policies. But as Carla said, much remains to be done to ensure that the dream becomes true. But the beginning steps, the first steps, seem to be promising. I'd like to, first of all, thank all those persons who have done a lot of hard work to ensure that today we are here. And in particular, two key groups. On one hand, the institutional driving force, a strategic alliance and cross-cutting between all Catalan institutions, without which it would have been impossible to hold this meeting. So thanks, Generalitat de Catalunya, the regional government, the City Council of Barcelona, the provincial government, and the Metropolitan area to make this possible. I'd also like to thank all the colleagues of the coordination group of the expert lab of the BTUI, with whom we discuss everything at a quarterly level. I would also like to ponder briefly on the right to the use of time. All of us here have one thing in common, at least one. We all have 24 hours every day. But the reality is that distribution of these times generates huge differences, and what we call time poverty. Poverty of time, above all, affects women and people with the least resources. And that is why, and as Carla and Carla were telling us, and this will be borne out by what is going to be said in the next few days, has a negative impact on health, on productivity, on equality, and on the sustainability of the planet. Let us speak loud and clear. The timetables that we have today in Catalonia and in the world are unhealthy. They perpetuate and increase inequality between men and women, and furthermore, they are no help at all to productivity or sustainability of our enterprises. So that is why we say that given that there is a different distribution of times, and this issue of time poverty, right now we have to start talking of the right to time as a citizen's right. This right to the use of time can generate a virtuous circle. More time available can lead to more health, which means more productivity, more equality, more co-responsibility, both personal and collective, and also more sustainability. Time policies in this post-pandemic context, and given the 2030 agenda, can be a very useful tool to be able to find solutions and face up to these challenges. To generate these, we need three factors to come together. Number one, the need to work together locally and globally, and that is why we are here in the Time Use Week, to share these local experiences, but also know what is being done in the rest of the world, and to share alliances and build alliances. Secondly, we do need to ensure that all local players in time use cooperate and be able to reach cross-cutting agreements which are specific and specific, right? This must include enterprises, public bodies, social agents, researchers, and also civil society. And as Carla said, to do that, it is vital that there should be awareness actions aimed at public opinion, at the citizens. We have shown how important it is to live with this internal clock, with our internal clock. So, Time Use Week is born as an encounter to bring together people's knowledge and experience on the use of time throughout the world, and to foster specific agreements, specific decisions. The 6 first editions were known as the Timetable Week, just within the Catalan sphere. Since last year, we share the Catalan experience and the international experience. And it is during this week, 70% of the speakers will be from other countries, from outside Catalonia. And it is no coincidence 60% of the speakers be women. Let me, as a conclusion, to give you like a foretaste of what we are going to listen to. First of all, we're going to talk about the future of work. Work takes up many of our waking hours. And when we talk with the right to time, we must also talk about the future of the world of work. We are also going to talk of the European Academy of Time Policies, how to coordinate at a European level all the research that is carried out and how to connect it with public policies. They don't have to be two worlds which are in parallel with no contact. And last but not least, as I was saying at the beginning, we shall talk of time use poverty. What are the data on public health and this poverty of time use, and what the impact it has? But we won't just talk. We shall also have a series of actions. We shall take actions which are clear with specific and robust commitments. We shall reinforce the international network of local and regional governments for the use of time. A commitment to ensure that all the principles which are working towards the use of time can continue, if you like, establishing synergies and learning from each other. And the same applies to regions. And on Friday, we shall end up signing the Barcelona Declaration on the Time Policies, a pioneering declaration at the world level, and which will set out a series of commitments to ensure that the right to time be part of the citizens' agenda. And I will finish off by saying that I encourage all of you to fully participate in the working sessions so as to put the right to time in the political, social, and economic mainstream agenda. Thank you very much. Well, Marta, what you're saying, the right of time as a challenge for citizens, well, if we talk of the right to education and health, we should also talk about the right to have decent timetables, to what you're saying, which is time poverty. I really like that. Now I'll hand over the floor to Marta Ballarin, who from the Metropolitan area of Barcelona. She is also a city councillor concerning markets in the city. Or not, I'm sorry. She's Vice President for Social Economic and Social and Economic Development in the Metropolitan area of Barcelona. So sorry. Hello, Montserrat Ballarin from the City Council of Barcelona and Vice President of the Metropolitan area, has not been able to come. And she had to go to the large wholesale market institution, Mercabarna. And if she's the president of Mercabarna, she had to be there. And coordinate things. It's also important that a woman, because yesterday there was a round table and there were 3 women who were talking of a very important subject. There were 3 men, which one would expect. First of all, I'd like to thank having invited the Metropolitan area, as Marta has said. I'd like to say hello to all the participants, the deputy, the MP and friend and mayor of Samboy, the Maurice Moret, Laura Perez, deputy mayor of the city of councillor, thank Carla Estivill, who's also a good friend, and others. So good morning and welcome. And it's up to me this week to be the first one who takes the floor. First of all, I'd like to apologize on behalf of Montserrat, Ballarin, who's not been able to be here, but also express the concern she has. She's not new to the sphere, and she has been breathing life into policies of time at the metropolitan area level. Also in Mercabarna, she is city councillor responsible for trade and commerce in the city, not a minor role. So from everything which is in with our remit, we have attempt to breathe life into this matter. I'd like to thank all those present here and all the experts who are here for the whole week. So it's a great opportunity we have today to begin to reflect and dialogue on something in commerce which will go beyond the strict framework of time. We'll talk of health, we'll talk of citizens' rights. These are matters which at some stage I'd like to see included. And how we include all this. It's very easy to say it's a right to citizens, but rights have to be expressed in terms of legal instruments. We can talk and talk and talk till the cows come home, but at the end of the day, we have an issue. We are talking about mobility, and we're talking of the fuel that makes buses run, but hydrogen. But it's very difficult to do that because there's certain contracts. When we wish to carry out radical changes, we do have to impulse legal changes. I'd also like to say that there are 3 subjects which are very important with the agenda of any politician, from the right to the far left. Disequality, the pandemic, and climate change. But the approaches are not the same, of course, and this is an element which is key, because this subject, depending on how it's done, will not overcome the problem of discrimination, of non-participation and social exclusion, which are the reasons which generate one of the main issues of our times. And there's a big risk here, which we have discussed with Nuria and Guillem. Nuria has been involved in this together with other colleagues, and Nuria is the one. There is a risk here. The risk is that time uses be aimed at the middle classes and upper middle classes, but exclude everyone else. And this risk is there, definitely. It's not, if you like, a theoretical risk. It's a hard fact. And it's one of the issues which we mustn't lose sight of, and it definitely has to be on the agenda. And mention has been made of that already by some of the speakers. We have to consider that time, and we must think of uses of time, social transformations which we're going through, mobility, and so on and so forth. And in some way, in terms of looking at the practical we have to really go to the basics, right? And we in the metropolitan area and AMB is the Metropolitan Area of Barcelona in its acronyms, right? And it is something important for me. The metropolitan areas are a very important function because in 30 years' time, cities and metropolitan areas will concentrate a very high percent of the population. So we're talking of land use planning of cities. That has to do with housing, and if you have 40 square meter housing areas for 7 people, that's wrong. And let's look at other cities, Montreal, Canada, Stockholm. We don't have to go that far. We don't have. We can go 2 kilometers from here to see third world conditions. There are districts pretty close to us right now, which are part and parcel of our city, with migrants, people with different cultures, and this is a very important task and must be done and this awareness must start at schooling. Now, the metropolitan area does have a series of municipalities which have done a lot of work, and we have Llui Moret, who, quite apart from being an MP, is the mayor of a very important city in the metropolitan area, Boy, which has done a lot of work in this sphere. And Luisa and Laura will be able to tell us about very important aspects and initiatives they've taken. This policy we have, and we are including this project, we believe it is very important. It's very important to give it this metropolitan, if you like, bias. I'm not talking about the organization. In the metropolitan area, in the territory, what happens in the municipality, and we, the metropolitan area has almost 4.5 million inhabitants. It affects big issues, mobility. People move. We need more time. But if you're spending an hour and a half to get to your workplace, an hour and a half to get back home, how are you going to get much free time? It's very difficult, right? So we have to look at that. And then the question of work, the world of work. And Marta was talking about the future of work, but it's something very interesting. I was reading an article which said that about 40% of new jobs in the new economy will be created, but 2030 will be destroyed. But socially, we know where jobs are being created and where they're being destroyed, and who are who's going to be affected, right? So we do need to look at that as a world of work. So we have mobility, there's a question of climate change, and to be specific, we in the metropolitan area did foster the panel for the economic reactivation and reindustrialization. That stemmed from the pandemic, but it was envisaged. And one of the things we had to do, and Llui will tell us, we have to reread the proposals again. Roger Torrent and others will have to look at measures which will affect the economy and the world of work and the organization of the world of work. We'll have to go measure by measure and look at the ones which have to do with technological change and how they affect time. And this is a very important work we have to carry out, and we'll have a series of metrics, of indicators. We cannot say we're going to do this and that and the other. No, we have to say, okay, how are we going to do it? Most of you know, you all know about indicators. I am responsible for Metropolitan Action, and when we have looked at time, we have included it. For us, this is very important. We have to measure, look at metrics, see how change takes place and what are the impacts. But And I have a challenge which I set myself as a vice president for the International Forum. We have to see how we include use of times on vocational training. We are part of a foundation concerning vocational training. We have here the coordinator of the new agency of vocational training, who used to be responsible for time, Fabian, and we shall have to see how vocational training can be a key tool to change the world of work, and the question of use of time. And last but not least, and with this I'll conclude because I've gone on for a bit too long, the importance of the reflection of time within our territory. And the last thing is quite apart from what Marta has said concerning regional and local governments. We are part of a world organization called the Metropolis, which brings together all the large urban metropolises in the world. So, therefore, we shall reflect upon the use of time. And that's all. Thank you very much. I hope the day is fruitful, and I'll be seeing you on Friday.
Bueno, vaig parlant, que anem molt malament a temps. L'àrea metropolitana és desconocida en Canadà, però també...
The Metropolitan Agency of Barcelona is unknown in Canada, but also in many of the towns that form part of it. So do not worry yourself if you had not heard of it before. Let's move on to our next speaker now. Llui Moret, the mayor of Sant Boi de Llobregat, and who is also president of the Equality and Social Sustainability area of the Barcelona Provincial Council. Thank you, Carlos. Good morning, everybody. Councillor, Vice Mayor, Vice President of the Catalan Parliament, and representatives of the Metropolitan area of Barcelona, and ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure for me to be here once again. I'm saying again because it's not my first time, and I see many familiar faces who have been in previous editions of this event, in order to discuss and share ideas and exchange knowledge on the use of time. The right to time, we need to call it by its name. It is a right to time. Not just the right to time itself, but the right to a balanced time, to a balanced use of time, so that the different uses we have of time, personal time, family time, work time, social time, are balanced. And that is a citizen's right. Therefore, we are speaking of a right that citizens have, but also this attempt of reorganizing time. This reorganization must be balanced, fair, equitable. And that is a challenge to all of us. And for each of the organizations we represent. It is a challenge, a collective and global challenge for all the different stakeholders represented here. One of the topics we need to work on this week, we have already been working on it over the years with different commitments, and I particularly want to highlight this agreement signed by different administrations recently, because it is going to be a spearhead. It is a real commitment, a real alliance, and it includes necessary commitments that are also real, specific, tangible commitments that will translate into specific policies. I represent the Diputació de Barcelona, a supramunicipal organization that serves the 300 plus towns and municipalities that form part of the province of Barcelona. It is a very diverse group of municipalities at the provincial level. And as Marta was saying, we need a global approach to time. We need a cross-sectional approach to time, but we also need to keep an eye on the citizens' daily lives at the local level, because that's where life takes place, at the local level. And that's where we have the opportunity to have an impact on citizens' lives and everyday realities, so that we can fight that time poverty we have already heard about. There is discrimination in the use of time. And therefore, as I was saying, the Diputació de Barcelona is supporting the different municipalities in the province of Barcelona by putting the use of time at the center of local policies in a cross-sectional manner, with a cross-sectional approach. This needs to seep through to all the different types of policies, not just those concerning time use. Policies such as cultural policies, sports, care, social care, so many others. And particularly, we need to incorporate a gender perspective. We are all aware that one of the deepest types of discrimination is that suffered by women in terms of the use of their time. The unbalanced distribution in the use of time. This generates inequality, it generates suffering, it generates discrimination. And we can see that in all areas, not just employment. Later on, I believe we will discuss this in more detail, the use of time in paid work. It's not the same. Women and men do not spend the same number of hours in paid work. Therefore, I'd just like to highlight the importance of local government in the creation of public policies and the implementation of public policies on the use of time. We need to encourage the creation and the implementation of social policies geared towards a fairer use of time. We have been doing so over a number of years now. Not just the Barcelona City Council, but also other local city councils in the Barcelona area have signed agreements and commitments on the use of time in a joint commitment to achieve real transformations in the lives of citizens. And then I'd also like to say a few words on the role of administrations. Our role is not merely designing and implementing policies, but also in making decisions as to how we transform our organizations through the use of time. Many city councils have done that through their employment agreements, through the transformation of their own governing bodies. And in a certain way, we are setting the example ourselves and practicing what we preach. So I should say that, as we're going to see this week, we have examples of good practices, of pioneering experiences, of transforming experiences, and we must make these, we must generalize these practices now. We must try that whenever we speak of time as a right, this is not something that remains in the academic environment and the policymakers' environment. This must be socialized. This must go wider and not just be a theoretical right, but a true and real right for our citizens. Thank you. Allow me just to pick up this lid. Oh, it's wonderful to see a politician so refreshing that speaks without reading their speech. We shall now give the floor to a representative from the Town Hall of Barcelona, the 4th Deputy Mayor for Social Rights, Global Justice, Feminisms and LGTBI at the Barcelona City Council, Laura Pérez. Well, I will have my notes before me. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. representatives from the different administrations. It's a pleasure for me to be here as a representative of the Barcelona City Council. First thing I must say is that although I am the representative here, this is the work of many other people, not just myself, many people in the Barcelona City Council. I recognize a few faces in the audience of people who have been involved in this area of work for months now. I've seen the enthusiasm in Marta's face in preparing the Time Use Week, and I'm also very pleased to see the effect that this may have for the city of Barcelona. Therefore, I'm delighted that we are hosting this debate. We are very interested in having this as an open debate, not behind closed doors. When we were having our meetings to prepare this event, we were all in agreement that this should be open to society, not just a matter that concerns the institutions, but to make it get through to the citizens, to smaller organizations, to business stakeholders, through different representatives of the business community that we have in the city. We can see how difficult it is to include and incorporate all areas of life, to push together in the same direction, to achieve real change, and also to take stock of what changes have been during the pandemic. We have all experienced these changes, each from our own position. Mine was exceptional in more ways than one, but the first, I took office right at the beginning of the pandemic, and I could see what changes it involved. I had a baby right at the start of the pandemic, and being a positive person as I am, I always try to see the positive side of things. My family were not able to meet the baby until she was a few months old, but we were able to adapt to the rhythms of the newborn baby, whereas this would have been more difficult had it not been for the pandemic. We were able to enjoy time without social pressure, without receiving visitors. I'm sorry to say that sometimes when you've just had a baby, it's not the best of times to have visitors. And also in connection to consumption, we did not need to buy quite so many things. We did not receive so many presents as you sometimes do when you have lots of visitors coming to see you after you've had a baby. But most of all, we were able to give ourselves all the time we needed. We were no longer slaves to our mobile phones. There was not a lot happening outside. Therefore, we were able to pay a lot of attention to ourselves and our rhythms. And I'm surprised to see how quick we are to forget all the lessons we learned during the lockdown. How after the way too short number of weeks that you have off when you're on maternity leave, you just step right back into the swing of things and forget about all the learnings you've been able to acquire. So I'd like to just remark how we should pay attention to those learnings and put them at the center of our policies, particularly gender policies, economic policies, mobility policies, and urban policies, as well as environmental ones. One of the previous speakers has already mentioned that local government has a lot to say, has a key role to play. We are well aware of that at the Barcelona City Council, where we had an area specifically designed to generate network and to work on the use of time. But time policy have an urban dimension, which is very important. Each of the policies we need to promote, mobility, for example, how much time we spend to travel throughout the city, what kind of mobility we are talking about. There is a gender aspect to this as well. All studies show that women are more frequent users of public transport. So the type of mobility, the type of transportation that we use, the type of production model we have, you know, the typical example of a man that leaves home in the morning, goes to work, comes back in the evening, and all the other tasks such as taking an elderly relative to hospital for a checkup, doing the shopping, etc., is left in someone else's hands. So we need to put care at the center of it as well. That's what we talk about when we talk about the 15-minute city. All the different measures that are being introduced in terms of the use of space in the city. There has also been a mention on time poverty and how unequally distributed it is between men and women. Many women will be able to take the recommendation to take an hour off to practice some yoga, because there will be another woman, probably a migrant woman, in a precarious situation in terms of employment, that will be able to take her place and care for whatever needs to be taken care of at home, so that this other woman can do her 1 hour of yoga. So these issues are also important to bear in mind when we are analyzing the situation and suggesting measures. We need to be very clear on who will benefit from these policies. Unless we are careful, the brunt of this will be borne by women again, who will be time poor again, and this has an indicator, this has a strong effect, a very clear effect on women, on women's health. Very often women have too little time left for self-care. We have tried to implement some measures to support them, such as the municipal child-minding service. We are trying to suggest some measures to make things a little bit better, but this is not a long-term solution. This municipal child-minding service helps women do things as varied as getting their driving license, or maybe meeting a friend for a cup of coffee, to share with someone how terribly busy or tired she is. So, but this is not a long-term solution. We need to talk about mobility, about culture, about the economy, about participation in a democracy. Also, how we use the opportunities provided to us by technology. All these opportunities land in an uneven playing field. We must not be naive and think that technology is going to even the playing field. There are many areas in Barcelona where many children have not been able to follow their classes during lockdown because they did not have access to the internet, or they did not have the required devices and tools to do so, and have therefore fallen behind. So, and finally, in Barcelona, we have a strategy to make care work more equitable. We need to do so by valuing more care work, by involving men in care work as well, and not leaving it mostly on the shoulders of women. And I will look at my notes just to make sure I do not forget to mention 2 key points. So I'm sorry, Carlos, but I'm going to disappoint you and look at my notes. We need governments to make clear, decisive policies. We have a joint agenda, but we need to make sure that that agenda can translate into specific policies, realistic and implementable policies. Caring is essential, and a good management of care is going to be at the root of how well we look after our society. That's going to be the foundation. The rights to, the care work needs to be fairly distributed, and new technologies are offering new opportunities. We need to know them well. We need to create new opportunities by all means, without deepening already existing inequalities. Thank you. And I checked my mobile phone just now to see if honorable has a feminine form in Catalan. It does not seem to be the case. So I shall now welcome the Honorable Tania Verge, Minister of Feminism and Equality at the Generalitat de Catalunya, the Government of Catalonia. Good morning, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen and organizers, it is my pleasure to be here today representing the Generalitat at the opening event of the Time Use Week, a week on the use of time, conceived here in Catalonia, but with the idea of being at the forefront of time use policies at an international level. And yes, indeed, Catalonia has been working on time use policies for decades, with various initiatives and agreements on the reorganization of time, with different decisions reached by the Catalan Parliament, looking to redistribute the use of time between work time and family time. And the government has issued 2 agreements: the Pact for change in the use of time, and for the reform of the uses of time. And the goal is set for 2025. And none of the organizations represented here has a magic wand to make that happen. It is a very complex topic, and it highlights the necessity to have cross-departmental, cross-sectional, cross-governmental work. As well as raising awareness, we must have a commitment with civil society organizations, with companies, and be aware that Catalonia is not a state. And therefore, many of these policies, many of these tools must be the result of a wide consensus between the country's institutions and the business fabric and the whole of social society organizations in Catalonia. Being the last speaker has a downside, which is that many of the things I would like to say have already been said. But the positive of it is that I can highlight what for me is most important. And it is that this is really a historic event, that we have a unique opportunity to redesign our use of time, our distribution of time, and we can do so with a gender perspective. Otherwise, we will not succeed. We must be very aware that time is a privilege, and we must be aware of the inequalities which are structural in the society we live in. 2025 is around the corner. We have all learned that teleworking is not the way to achieve a work-life balance, particularly when the right to disconnect is not guaranteed. It seems now to be clearer than ever that we need to rethink our lives. we are aware of how important time is, how closely related to health it is, how the way in which we work and telework is important for our well-being. But for most women, it has been quite the opposite. Time poverty has increased because of this sexual gender division of labor, which is inherent in any patriarchal society. Caring of children, of dependents, relatives, of dependents, relies heavily on women. And therefore, it is extremely important to say, at the risk of repeating what has already been said by previous speakers, that this is a historic opportunity we have. So we need to bear this in mind whenever we take action. It is also a right for us citizens to have the right to use their time for social and political participation, for sport, for leisure, for work, absolutely. And I'm saying this from my personal experience as a researcher in political sciences. The relationship, the power imbalances in social organizations and political parties, how gender inequality is used, where it is harder to change this balance is in the use of time. And that's why we need this strong alliance between the different institutions in order to make a change. And the right to time is unachievable for women unless it comes alongside a redistribution of care work. The right to care needs to be tackled as well. Unless we do that, we will not be able to guarantee a right to time. If society as a whole is not jointly responsible of freeing up some time for society at large, particularly for women, particularly for migrating women, given the impact that this has on their health and well-being. Finally, I'd like to highlight that the lack of time that we have available is yet another expression of social, economic, and political inequality. The distribution of time is political, with a capital P. Therefore, at the Generalitat de Catalunya, we are going to do our bit, both within the government, in the work between the different departments. We have a particular Direction General on the redistribution of work, but also working with different stakeholders, different administrations, creating networks, and strengthening the work that has already been started at the local level with business agents, companies, because the work we have ahead of us is huge if we really want to make it in time for 2025 with specific actions that are realistic. So finally, time use policies are essential so that time is not a luxury for a few. And therefore, I'm using the masculine gender, which is not generic. The use of time must not be a privilege. It must not be something outside the reach of women and those in more precarious positions in our societies. Finally, I'd like to thank the organizers and wish you all an enjoyable week where we will have the chance to hear different initiatives and projects here in Catalonia, but also in other regions of the world, to see how other experts are doing it in different parts of the world to strengthen the leadership of Catalonia and our municipalities in the use of time. And let's make sure that time is finally a new measure of equality and well-being for everybody and not a privilege for a few. Well, we're over 25 minutes late. So the catering would be done by Burger King if this were not the type of event that it is. So I'll be very quick. Thank you all for being here. It is prisons, hospitals, and kindergartens where these policies, these measures are being implemented. The rest of us still have a lot to do.